If you're not already subscribed to this YouTube channel, hit the subscribe button now and also the bell icon so you can be notified when a new video drops. And if you're already subscribed, check and make sure that YouTube hasn't tried to unsubscribe you. Seems every week I get a few people who message me telling me that YouTube took it upon itself to unsubscribe them from my channel. And of course, be sure to give the video a like. The white supremacists hate that. Now, that said, with the number of Confederate monuments being taken down in recent weeks, the white supremacists, especially those who consider themselves to be a little more educated than the average inbred, they've been taking a number of high-profile L's. They understand exactly what those obscene monuments stand for. They are the white supremacists having, they thought, staked their claim. We're going to put a symbol of white supremacy in the middle of town square. We're going to put it in front of the courthouse. This is to mark it as a white supremacist stronghold. That's the whole point. And with the removal of these symbols, the white supremacists understand that what they stand for has also come under strict threat. David Milch explained that when it comes to symbols, symbols are very important because symbols are how groups of people focus their collective will. A symbol gives a group of people the ability to come together and accomplish great things, even when the symbol's origin has been removed. The Christian cross being a good example. You don't need Jesus Christ to be there in order to focus the will of the collective. The cross alone, as a symbol of Christianity, that can be enough to focus that collective will. So the power of symbols is profound. That's the reason why tyrants and virtuous people alike use them, because they're powerful. They're able to get people's attention. They're able to get people to do what you want. I always promised myself that at some point I was going to do some sort of video essay dealing with the concept of a national myth. And I know that for some people, it just seems to me that some of the video essays that I think happen to be the most important and the ones that I want people to pay the most attention to because they got the most to say, seems people show the least interest in those video essays. You got to make it about a person in order for people to pay more attention. But a couple of years back, I did a video essay about George Washington, the first fascist, pointing out that with all of those early sculptures and statues of George Washington going all the way up until the middle of the 19th century, they show George Washington always standing beside a fasces. The fasces was the symbol of ancient Rome, and it was where we get the term fascism from. Benito Mussolini reached back to Roman antiquity for the phraseology that he wanted to use for his new authoritarian regime. And the fasces being the symbol of ancient Rome, he looked and said, that's a symbol that I want to use too. Well, in the United States, these guys were all about fascism before fascism was cool. But with that video essay, what I wanted to touch upon to make sure was properly emphasized was that there was a necessity to take George Washington and to deify him, because that's what they did. They commissioned all sorts of sculptures and paintings, all for the sake of making George Washington into a quasi-deity. Now, they didn't do that because they had any particular affection for him. When it comes to the founders of the United States, that was not the First Continental Congress who got together. That was the First American Crime Convention. Gangsters from every part of North America came together to carve up the country and stake out their turf. These men did not like each other. We know that a number of the founders of the United States could not stand each other, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson being the most noteworthy of rivals. Hell, John Adams hated Thomas Jefferson so much, on his very last day on earth, John Adams' last words, the words that he would take with him into eternity were, "And Thomas still lives." He hated Thomas Jefferson so much, here he is about to take his final breath, and the only thing on his mind is, I can't believe that bastard Thomas Jefferson outlived me. That's what he was thinking about, his very last thought on this earth. And of course, we all know about Alexander Hamilton got himself killed in a duel. I mean, these are the founders of the United States, decent folk. You wouldn't see these guys trying to harm anybody, except for when they were. But the myth of the United States, if you want to have some sort of lie that stands for the long term, you better figure out a way to attach it to some sort of myth. Now, myths should not be confused with legends. The difference between a legend and a myth is a legend contains some facts, like Sasquatch. Bigfoot. What the hell is Bigfoot? Well, perhaps Bigfoot was a bear. And there are some bears who, under certain circumstances, will actually walk on their hind legs if their front paws have been injured or something of that nature. Or maybe somebody who, you saw old cousin Cletus or something. He was a little bit drunk and he was running around in his ghillie suit or his, dressed up like Daniel Boone or something. It's hard to say. These clowns talk about Sasquatch. God only knows how much moonshine and meth they were smoking. But legends are usually based on some sort of factual basis. They just play fast and loose with the events. That's how legends are. A myth, on the other hand, is not based on fact at all. It's symbolic, and it's meant to be symbolic. That's the entire point of having a myth. Myths are structured like stories, and that's deliberate. Because the reason that stories are so important to a society, and I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but the reason that stories matter so much to the human experience is because stories provide something that real life almost never provides. Context. That's what stories tend to do. Stories tend to put events and tend to put circumstances and people into context. Real life almost never does that. Very difficult to get context from events in real life. And that's the reason why when it comes time to set up your little endeavor and you want people to buy into it, you need to come up with a story. And that story has to be a myth. You can have a legend if you want, but the biggest problem with legends happens to be legends don't awe people. They're not mind-blowing. Myths are. Myths of a necessity require you to suspend all disbelief, not just a little bit. It requires you to suspend all disbelief. And once you suspend disbelief, well, you're just going along with whatever you're told, which is the entire point. Now, the founders of the United States and their descendants and their successors all the way up until the mid-19th century and beyond, truth be told, they set about a project to deify George Washington. They decided that he was going to be the American myth. Now, of course, when it comes to the United States, there's a number of mythologies and lies and hypocrisies, but the myth had to be centered around George Washington because he was a general. He represented the Marshall Principle. And he also was pushed to become a statesman. This was meant as a means of showing that he was civilized, cultured, whatever. But nonetheless, they showed this guy in Roman attire. These were the ideas of the founders of the United States. It was Thomas Jefferson's idea to do this stuff. Got George Washington dressed up in a toga like he's some sort of Roman. In my video essay about George Washington, the first fascist, I explained to you how in 1865, while the Civil War was basically still going on, you had the U.S. government decide that the ceiling of the Capitol building needed to be painted so that it could be evocative of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel in Rome. Well, since Thomas Jefferson decided that an Italian should do some of those fake sculptures of George Washington, in 1865 they decided, hey, if it was good enough for old TJ, it's good enough for us. So they got an Italian to do the painting of the ceiling of the Capitol building, of the dome of the Capitol building. And the name of this painting was called The Apotheosis of Washington. The term apotheosis means the deification, elevation to divine status, as Merriam-Webster defines it. That's what they decided to call it. It was a rather ridiculous replica of the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, except instead of having God on his throne, they decided to put George Washington there as well. I can only imagine how many people must have been snickering at themselves when they saw that. I mean, take a look at that. It would be ridiculous if it wasn't for the fact that people actually took this stuff seriously, and they've been looking at it for over 150 years, and apparently it never occurred to them, hey, isn't this just a little bit strange? Supposed to be a Christian nation here, but they have no problem with taking a slave-owning white man and putting him in the place of God. Apparently nobody saw the contradiction in that. Nobody seemed to think that it was terribly blasphemous or wrong or sacrilegious 150 years ago, and apparently today they still don't seem to have a problem with it. And they had one of the angels or the muses or whatever you want to call it holding a fasces. But this is deliberate. You see how this is just an ongoing effort that they engaged in over the course of decades to build the myth of George Washington as being a deity. And keep in mind, those statues and such, those sculptures originally, they were done during the time when George Washington was still alive. He may not have seen all of them, but he definitely saw a few of them, and he didn't seem to have a problem with that. See, one of the other lies that gets told about old GW is that he was ultimately a humble man, and in the early years of the Republic, which was no republic at all, and never has been, they had the idea that maybe America should have a royal family and that they would nominate George Washington to be the nation's king. And George Washington said, "No, I do not want to do that. This shall be a nation of laws, not a nation of men." Problem is, it's always been a nation of men, not of laws. A nation of men indeed, white men. The laws be damned. Whatever white supremacy says on Monday, that's the law. And if it says something exactly the opposite on Tuesday, that's the law. Just like Greg Abbott over in Texas. You had that asinine hairdresser, that white woman in Fort Worth, I think it was, who violated social distancing. They told her, the Governor Abbott, he gave his orders saying you got to close down your shop. But because it was a black judge who told that woman, since you refuse to close down your shop, I'm putting you in jail for 7 days and I'm putting a fine on you, Governor Abbott said, yeah, I know what my executive order said. Well, I'm reversing my own executive order. That is a nation of men, not a nation of laws. That's the very definition of it. Whatever I said on Monday, well, because the wrong colored judge decided that he was going to sentence the wrong color person under my law, I'm going to change my law. But George Washington, you had to do this for that scumbag. You have to make a myth out of him. You have to deify him. You got to make the guy into a god, because after all, no one questions a god, no matter how many sins that god may commit against them. That's the reason why you do it. You are deifying not only him, but everything that he's done. So what that shows is the exact same idea of we must deify George Washington. They weren't doing it because they liked him. These guys were doing it because they wanted to solidify their power over the minds of the masses. The founders of the United States were rivals with each other. But they understood that they need to put that rivalry aside if they were going to keep the people enthralled, if they were going to keep the people in line. Hence, the absolute necessity to create a national myth. And this is not unique to the United States. A lot of countries have a national myth of some sort. The most famous, of course, being Rome, Romulus and Remus, raised by wild wolves. And, obviously wolves would not eat babies. I mean, that would be so unanimal-like of them. That would be so strange for a wolf to actually raise children, human children, as opposed to eat them, which is much more likely. But hey, come on. When you're trying to find a way to otherwise whitewash or to try to put a thin patina of rationality to the savagery of Rome, that's what they were doing with the lie about Romulus and Remus. That myth, a complete bald-faced lie on its face that nobody with sanity would believe. Japan's got one too, especially about the royal family, about the emperor's family descended from the goddess Amaterasu, etc. And God's tears fell and those became the islands of Japan. A lot of countries have a national myth. And that's important because national myths tend to be superlative in nature. That way people don't question it. But what happens when you have years or even centuries where people try to live in a lie? Because myths are not real, they're lies. They're not even legends. Legends are based partially on fact. Myths are not. So what happens when people try to live out a lie? What happens is reality always has the last word. And that's what you see going on right now. A lot of individuals, a lot of people have been allowed to live in a lie for centuries. And because they've been indulged living in this dream world, now you got black folks kicking them in the keister and telling them you're getting a wake-up call whether you want to or not. See, after all the centuries of black folks getting the Negro wake-up call, now the white supremacists are getting their cracker wake-up call. And they ain't liking it too much. But this is what has happened recently. These people told themselves that because their lies have never been challenged, they never would be, and now they are. But they're also showing you they don't care whether or not it's true or not. This is not about truth. This is not about whether or not the Confederates actually were some sort of Southern patriots, some sort of selfless individuals fighting for their own twisted idea of honor. That's not the important thing here. They know exactly what it is that they're doing. And this is deliberate. The United States government, the lie that the Confederates tried is no different than the lie the United States have been living out. And I can tell you right now, had the Confederacy been successful, at least successful in a military sense, they were certainly successful in a political sense after the war. They lost the war but won the peace. But had they been successful militarily, I can tell you right now, they would have elevated Jefferson Davis to some sort of quasi-deified status. Yeah, he was running around in a dress half the time. That's how he got caught, by the way, running around in a dress. And sure, you would have had these clowns claiming that somehow God had inspired them with some sort of vision, which is exactly what the Dutch occupation regime in South Africa did. A bunch of Calvinists. They didn't have the military power to challenge any of the Europeans elsewhere in Africa. So they pulled some rearguard stunt in southern Africa and told everybody that, well, God wants us to have this. God wants us to. Now, myth can be innocent enough if you're talking about another country where their influence doesn't hold sway over where you are. Myth can be harmless enough if it's told to everyone that this is all made up and please don't take this seriously. But what happens when people are told a myth and they're told to believe it and this is the God's honest truth? You need to buy into it. Myths become dangerous when they become politicized. And as I've taught you, when you use the word politics, when people bring up that term politics, you make sure that you understand what that word actually means. Because when I use the term politics, I'm not talking about left-wing, right-wing, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal. I mean politics in the true sense of the term. The definition of politics is the distribution of power in a given setting, because no matter where you are, no matter what group of people you're around, there's always an uneven distribution. Doesn't matter if we're talking about bedroom politics, if we're talking about family politics, office politics, or electoral politics, which is the type that most of you have been indoctrinated to believe is the only form of politics. There's many, many, many forms of politics in every arena of life. White supremacy has come to dominate most of them. We're in the process of dismantling their stranglehold now. But when it comes to politics and the politicization of myths, it becomes absolutely catastrophic. Because you're not telling people to buy into a myth for nothing. You're telling them to do so in order to justify actions you want taken. When myth becomes politicized, especially when it comes to politicizing it for the sake of national character, then what a myth is meant to do is it is meant to justify and legitimize either what a country has already done or things that it intends to do. One of the big lies that's been told about old GW, George Washington, was that he chopped down a cherry tree. That's a lie. That never happened. But in the lie, we are told that George Washington's father asked him, Junior, did you chop down this cherry tree? I see the tree is already on the ground and you're sitting here holding a hatchet. And I'm just curious, did somebody else chop the tree down and you just took the hatchet away from him, but it was too late? What happened? I can't figure this out on my own, son. What happened? And of course, we're told that Scooter Jr. replied, Pops, I can't tell no lies. The niggers did it. We're told that George Washington said that he could not tell a lie. Now, interesting enough, George Washington wasn't the one who put out this bit of fiction. Some of his would-be boosters did. But as we all know, George Washington was a platinum-plated liar. He told black people that if they helped him to defeat the British, that he would abolish slavery, and we all know how that one turned out. We all learned how good George Washington's word was, now didn't we? Well, it turned out he could tell a lie after all, couldn't he? But that's the entire point. You got people being told that George Washington couldn't tell a lie, and yet nobody ever brings up one of the biggest lies that bastard ever told. And then, of course, children are taught these lies. And they grow into adults who cling to these lies. But of course, the entire point of creating the myths around these individuals, whether it's George Washington or TJ or JD or any of the rest of these slave-owning clowns, the entire reason of creating these lies happens to be in order to ennoble or otherwise give some thin patina of respectability and dignity to a bunch of rapists and thieves and cutthroats and genocidal murderers. That's the entire point. And the individuals who cling to these lies, they understand that's the point too. George Washington, they could give less than a damn about George Washington. These people who are trying to protect George Washington statues, they sound exactly like the people trying to stick up for the Confederacy because they're doing it for the same reasons. They understand that this is not about George Washington or about Thomas Jefferson or about General Lee. This happens to be about the establishment and the perpetuation of white supremacy in the society. And these are symbols of white supremacy. When it becomes okay to attack a nation's symbols, when you take the symbols, the things that have been used to focus people's collective will, when you have a situation where it's okay to remove these individuals from the places of honor in the society, what you're saying is these guys are dishonorable, but you're also saying that what they stand for is dishonorable, and the individuals whom their rape and murder benefited are dishonorable as well. You see, white supremacy has always promoted itself with the lie that, well, it's basically decent. That's part of the reason why they try to figure out some way to clean it up. If we can't come up with a moral basis to justify our white supremacist behavior, then we'll try to figure out a way to intellectualize it. We'll try to figure out a way to get some people, some pointy-headed eggheads from the Ivy League who will try to come up with, they'll either use or invent some $10 words that we can try to use. Okay, if somebody can't figure out a way to justify the enslavement of black people on the grounds that black people are physically inferior, well, we'll come up with something else. Hey, we'll come up with a new word, drapetomania. And no, that has nothing to do with upholstery or interior design. But that's what they do. They try to find something that exists and twist it to their needs, or they try to invent words altogether. That's usually what they have to do. White supremacy is so twisted and so idiosyncratic, it can't even use pre-existing words. You got to come up with new stuff to try to explain away its evil and venality. But these people who are trying to argue that there's some sort of justification for holding on to the Confederacy, just understand the exact same thread, the exact same line that tethers the justification for letting Confederate monuments to white supremacy stand are the exact same lines that get used for George Washington and Woodrow Wilson and all the rest of them. Oh, Donald Trump said something that a lot of white folks, conservative and liberal alike, all understand. Hey, if we're going after Confederate statues, well, hell, don't take much imagination to figure out that Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, these guys were slave owners too. Ain't gotta go too far to figure out that Francis Scott Key was a lawyer for slave owners and a slave owner himself. And this is the guy who the nation decided they were going to take one of his songs and make it into the national anthem. Yeah, it doesn't take much imagination to figure that out at all. So some idiot trying to tell you, this is about history. This is about history. Well, as Napoleon said, history is a lie agreed upon. Well, at least the Europeans. For the Europeans, history has been nothing but a number of lies. They agree on what the story is going to be, and we're going to move forward with this. Of course, when you got a bunch of lies, that's nothing more than a myth. And what's happening is people are acquainting them, black people are acquainting them with the history as it actually happened. And what they're finding is their lies are not standing. White supremacy requires that people buy into it to some degree or another. And that's part of the reason why they tell you that, oh, you got some politicians here who you can vote for. Yeah, they're not going to do anything that you tell them to do. And you're going to be choosing from a pre-selected slate of white supremacist flunkies and bootlicks that the white supremacists have presented to you. And if you're silly enough to do that, well, you'll be wondering, how come no matter how many times we vote, nothing changes? Just keep on voting, though, because after all, the system is able to be influenced, just not by you, that's all. It relies on that lie. And it also relies on the idea that people buy into the concept that, well, America's not perfect, but oh, this nation's getting better all the time, and why there's nothing wrong with America, that what's right with America cannot fix. That's another lie that the U.S. exported to the world. Oh, don't worry about all the black people who were murdering and lynching, and the churches that were firebombing, and the black townships that we are burned to the ground, and tens of thousands of black people murdered in the process of these genocides. Don't worry about all that. Why, the United States, don't you know that they made Frederick Douglass a U.S. Marshal and he was ambassador to Haiti? So doesn't that, you can't be worried about the burnings of all of these black townships. Don't worry about Rosewood. Don't worry about the Elaine massacre. Don't worry about Tulsa. Oh, well, hey, don't you know that President Roosevelt shook hands with a Negro? That's the lie that they've been pushing because they got a couple of black folks in the back somewhere, the few who they haven't lynched. Well, that means you cannot question them about all this other grimy, evil stuff that they've done. And they have stuck with that line ever since. Oh, don't worry about what's happening with Red Hook Summer. Don't worry about what's happening with the civil rights protesters being hit with attack dogs and water hoses. Oh, what we're gonna do is we're going to have a day for Dr. King, and oh, all that stuff was behind us now. Oh, it's all behind us now, and believe you me, the nation has changed. Oh, yes, indeed, we have changed. Meanwhile, they're laughing up their sleeves, going, "Man, wonder how long we'll be able to get away with this one." They just keep buying it. I'm sure the white supremacists themselves are surprised. This is one of the things we've been telling you for the longest time. You can get a lot of things changed if you stop actually believing what the white supremacists tell you. The white supremacists were the ones who told you that, oh, that reparations thing, they ain't never going to go anywhere. See, what they understand, and you've seen this on MSNBC, they understand that all this crap about trying to change the subject with COVID-19 and trying to change the subject with Trump, we're not getting off of that. What's going on with the police? We are not at all fooled or distracted. Yes, what's going on with the police is important, but it's part of a larger agenda. And reparations is going to be on the ballot. And whatever candidate stands for reparations, cash reparations, that's the one who gets the vote. The other one does not. Oh, yeah, the white media is slowly but surely realizing, wait a minute here, we figured that we gave a little bit of empty lip service to police reform, notice that they never say punishment. We figured that you niggers would see that Donald Trump's not going for any sort of police reform, and the Republicans aren't, and the Democrats aren't either, by the way. They figure that they give a little bit of lip service, black folks will be impressed by this and go, well, you know what? We got to do something we got to go ahead and vote for a Democrat. Joe Biden has said that he's not in favor of defunding the police, and he's not in favor of punishing the police either. But you know, he's not Donald Trump, and that's all. They're still trying that scam. It ain't working. So since they understand they're not going to get us off of this cash reparations deal because they're not going to be able to change that, they're trying to figure out how to bring in some hand-picked flunky Negroes whose job it is going to be to say that reparations should be something else. And they're going to look at these hand-picked flunkies that they brought in and say, well, this Negro who we paid for to be on one of our segments and say that reparations should be something else, we think that we should listen to them. And then we're going to say that, see, reparations have been dealt with. We've dealt with the greatest crime in human history. Why, our hand-picked flunky Negro over here, who we paid to be on our program, why, she says that it's a dead issue now and it's been dealt with and everything else is just commonplace bigotry. And, well, the issue is settled. The greatest crime in human history has been atoned for pennies on the dollar, most of which are going to be going to white people. And, well, that's that. That's what they're trying to set up, to give themselves permission to say, oh, we've dealt with this, that reparations thing. Oh, we have embraced the horror and we dealt with it. Yet another national myth. And that's the point that I want you to get across to yourself. You notice how you start off with one lie. And that lie isn't the only one. The problem with the lie is once you commit to the first lie, you then have to keep telling another lie to support it, and then one to support that, and to support the next one. You have to keep on lying. It never stops. And what happens when a nation is founded on lies? The nation continues lying every day ever since. And I'm sure that during the course of this video essay, more than a few of you have had the thought that practically all religions are based on myth. And of course, white supremacy being the most dominant religion on the planet, certainly an article of faith for Confederates and would-be historians and patriots alike. Both of them believing the same types of lies for the exact same reasons. One's a little bit more vulgarized than the other, but they're both the same. The same neo-Confederate who tells you, my daddy and my granddaddy, I didn't own no slaves. Well, I got news for you. Those same good white liberals out there holding BLM signs, you start talking about cash reparations, they'll say, reparations for what? They'll be sounding just like Elizabeth Warren. You start talking about anything that's going to cause a change in power for black people, something that's going to empower black people, something other than gestures, now they're going to have issues. Don't let the white media con you with that dog and pony show going on Capitol Hill. Democrats and Republicans are both agreed that they do not want any sort of repeal or any sort of blocking of the legal concept of qualified immunity. Qualified immunity was originally created by the Supreme Court as a concept to protect politicians from being sued. That's who the original beneficiaries of qualified immunity were. That's who the first lawsuit regarding that concept was about. It was to protect politicians from being sued as a result of the laws that they pass. And then a couple of years later, somebody decided that, hey, if you're talking about protecting government officials, well, the police ought to be included too. Never mind the fact that the police are not government officials. A sheriff may be because he's elected. But the local thug in blue with a gun and a badge, that's not a government official. He's an employee, but not an official. You got to either be elected or appointed in order to have that, and police are neither. But the Supreme Court, understanding exactly where this was all going, is a matter of, yeah, we want to make sure that we embolden the thugs in blue, especially because we're going to be going all out with this war against black people. You see, at the exact same time that Joe Biden was co-sponsoring and his pals like Strom Thurmond and others were writing legislation that was meant to turbocharge the prison industrial complex, you had the Supreme Court suddenly decide to get hot and bothered about the idea that the police need to be protected legally from any and all claims of liability. These are not at all coincidences. Like the Supreme Court. What, you think the Supreme Court, that right-wing Supreme Court, just decided on a whim? The conservative judges decided they were in favor of gay marriage and in favor of trying to reinforce it? No, the Supreme Court is as political as the Congress. They look at which direction they see the political parties are going, and that's what they look to support and to preserve, except where black people are concerned. They understand when it comes to black people, nah, that's not supposed to be changing at all. That's the reason why the same week that the Supreme Court said DACA should be the law of the land. And yeah, we're going to do a victory lap for LGBT whatever. That same week, they also said, oh, and these 8 lawsuits, these 8 cases regarding qualified immunity. Yeah, we know the Supreme Court made this mess. We know the qualified immunity was a mess the Supreme Court made, and we're not cleaning it up. We're going to throw it back to the Congress, which they know is the same as saying nothing will be done about it, because neither Democrats or Republicans are actually going to do anything about it. The Supreme Court knows that they cannot reinforce qualified immunity because the exact same delegitimization that's happened to the police, they're like, well, hell, the judiciary's next. The judges are going to be the next. So we're not even going to touch this one. Hot potato, throw it back to Congress and say we don't want it. So while I'll be the first one to tell you that the removal of these obscenities in public, which is what these so-called monuments are, I'll be the last one to tell you that these are irrelevant or even small things. I don't want you thinking it's the end all and be all. But nonetheless, it does have value, and it also is important simply because it is an example of black people imposing their will. And it is also a reminder to the neo-Confederates and their liberal sympathizers alike that no, we have not forgotten. The former slaves have not forgotten, and these national debts ain't going away. They understand where this conversation's going, so they're trying to manage it right now. As far as they're concerned, the removal of these monuments, they couldn't keep them up anyway. They understood that, hey, if these guys are willing to knuckle up on the police, it doesn't take, and they're willing to knock down statues and monuments, you're not able to hold them up anyway, so you might as well go ahead and pretend as if, well, you know what? We've had an epiphany. We've decided to go ahead and remove them. Yeah, you might as well remove them because the people are going to do it for you. See, the bad guys understand the idea of, well, the government's going to stand back while we violate the rights of black people, but they're not used to the idea of the government not stopping black people's rights from being trampled. When the people exercise their rights and the government doesn't stop them, or rather cannot stop them. Oh, they recognize that all right. And especially when it's black people who are exercising those rights, they're understanding, well, the only thing really that we've had to keep these niggers in check is organized violence, pretending to be law enforcement. And well, the niggers, they just been letting us kill them, and then they pretend that the DA, we got to wait to see what the DA says. We know what the DA is going to say. And we'll hand it over to the judge, who, by the way, just got through coming back from the local clavern. Nice little cross burning we had. And they're just going to sit back and wait and see what these guys do. And of course, when they come back, when the DA says ain't no charges or the judge says I'm throwing the case out, well, we'll have our white liberal friends say, well, the system ain't perfect, but it's all we got and maybe another law. What they're seeing is the people are looking and going, well, obviously we got more than enough laws in the books. The problem happens to be the people who have decided to call themselves administering the law. It's the people who need to be dealt with. The laws are fine. The laws can stay. It's the people who have taken over these apparatuses and these institutions. They're the ones who have to go, whether they want to or not. That's what they're seeing happening here. Hell, when you got the slow coast over at Fox News who have enough wit to call this out, they understand. People are not going to be looking to the ballot box to solve these issues. What they're scared of, what they're really concerned about is the next time the police decide they're going to kill somebody or that they're going to harm someone, the people are like, we're not going to the DA. We don't care about any special prosecutor. We're not concerned about any sort of government oversight. Handling police violence is going to be a local issue. It is going to be an issue for the citizenry. That's what they're concerned about. Well, it's a mess of their own making. Since these white supremacists have refused to rein themselves in, they have left the public no choice but to rein them in. And because the politicians and the judges and the white media have been cheerleaders and protectors and apologists for all of this white supremacist with a badge violence, people are looking and going, don't listen to the media, ignore the politicians, and the judges are irrelevant. They created this circumstance. And now they're trying to pretend as if, we're going to get out in front of this thing and you citizens, you guys need to wait on us. And you know what? We've had an epiphany and we're going to regain our legitimacy by pretending as if we are with the people. Yeah, because they can't stand against the tide of history that the uprising represents. So that being the case, they're going to pretend for a hot minute to be part of it. And then as soon as they think that they've got a few people buying into the scam, then it's going to be all right, back to the same old. We're going to lead you guys back to the same old, same old. What they're waiting to see is, are the people going to wait for them to solve a problem that they created? Black people did not create the problem of police violence against black people. We are not the ones who created the slave catchers. We're not the ones who created the legal and social environment and climate of permissiveness for all of this anti-black violence. We didn't create that. The white supremacists did. And you got black people looking and going, you know what? We're not going to wait for the white supremacists to fix a problem that they created. And if the people make it very clear that the police and the politicians and the judges have no authority, then how are they going to hold on to the positions that they have? How are they not going to be punished? That's the big question. That's the sum of all fears for them. When you got a situation where the citizenry looks and goes, all of these guys are illegitimate, that doesn't mean that people are going to say, well, there's not going to be any sort of law enforcement. Sure, there'll be law enforcement, but it's going to be what the people choose, who the people choose, how the people choose it's supposed to be. And of course, as with all uprisings, when the people decide that the ones who have been mistreating them are going to be held to account, well, that's going to be going too. But this is all meant to derail that process. Do not think that a couple of gestures and tokens is somehow a change. This is the time to be having sharp elbows. This is the time to be stepping on the white supremacy's toes hard with those lead-lined, iron-heeled gunboat boots. This is the time to be doing that. This is not the time for any sort of timidity or meekness. This is the time to make it very clear this is what our demands are, and you won't redefine it, and we're not going to be arguing about it, and we don't give a damn how many times you say no. We only need to be able to impose our will once to get your mind right. Power is not about asking. Power is about taking. Power is not about getting permission. Power is about assuming it. Reminds me of that rap song I heard one time. I forget who the guy's name is. I'm sure I'll have people in the comment section carpet bombing me with the answer. But it was some rapper who said, I know you're going to let me do this. I know you're going to let me do that. I forget what the name of it is, and it doesn't matter. But the point is, that's the ethos of assuming power. You're not sitting there going, can I? Instead, it's, oh, I know you're going to let me do this. Because you've already assumed, A, I'm going to do what I want, and B, I'm going to have a means to pacify the detractors who decide that they disagree. That is the assumption of power, and that's something that white supremacy has spent 400 plus years attempting to beat out of black people, to cajole us out of it, bringing in preacher man hustlers and other assorted forms of bootlicks and traitors to try to talk us out of. Nobody's listening to the pulpit pimps. Nobody's listening to the Ta-Nehisi Chokes and other white supremacist black friends. Nobody's listening to Barack Obama, your first biracial president, invalidated. No, what's happening now is people are deciding that as black folks, what we need, the most important thing we need is not to get some politician elected to office. The most important thing we need is to get on code. Jason Black beautifully defined being on code is that we all understand what is in our interest and we act accordingly. I added that last part because I want to make sure that we link not merely the knowledge, but also the action. Code is not just knowing what's in our interest, it's also acting accordingly. Because that's what a code of conduct is. It is about your actions. How do we act? And how we've been acting is lackadaisical. How we've been acting is all sorts of deferential, and in the process, we have emboldened the bad guys. Now, they're testing us right now. They want to see if we're serious about whether or not the white supremacists are going to be punished, because they're like, oh, the politicians ain't going to do it. Let's see if we're going to go ahead and test the electric fence and see if we get shocked again, see if we get zapped again. Are these guys really on code, or are they just pretending to be? Was this just some bout of indignation on their part, or is this the new normal? Because the reason that all these profane obelisks are being taken down is not because black people have made a moral argument. Black people have been making moral arguments for the longest time. When black people showed, we're going to go and take them down ourselves. And you better not be thinking that you're going to be sending any thugs with badges to tell us that what we will or will not do. Don't think that's going to be happening. When black folks decided that they were going to act in their own self-interest, independent of what any white supremacist who has assumed political power may think of the matter, when black people started assuming power, that's what made these white supremacists decide, we better pretend as if this was our idea. We got to get out in front of this. We can't have these guys doing. We got to get out in front of this somehow. That which you cannot defeat, that which you cannot control, you have no choice but to accept. But by challenging these symbols of white supremacist dominance, by either destroying them outright or at the very least forcing the white supremacists to remove them from the commons, from the places that belong to everyone, the white supremacists realize there would be mark of white supremacist dominance. We're marking our claim. Your claim just got revoked. And it got revoked by the former slaves. And there was nothing you could do about it. This is something white supremacy cannot stand. White supremacy must be supreme. Oh, that doesn't mean that black folks can't complain. It just means that it doesn't mean anything. Black folks' complaints don't actually result in anything changing. But now it's being changed. And the politicians have had nothing to do with it. And that's what bothers them. That's what scares them. That's what they're worried about. And that's what they're attempting to get us to stop. Can they get us to wait? If people just wait on these white supremacist politicians and their black bootlicks, well, surely they'll just go back to that. Surely they'll go back to waiting on white supremacy to clean up its own act. Whether or not they are right is entirely up to you, but understand that one of the most dangerous myths that white supremacy has been able to get to take hold and establish is a myth that doesn't really involve the white supremacists directly. It's one that involves us. Arguably the biggest lie that white supremacy has pushed, at least as far as the United States is concerned. The biggest national myth that the U.S. has been trying to promote and push and establish in the world mind is that the United States is somehow uniquely morally right, that the U.S. has a sort of moral authority. Now, they started off, of course, with other white people claiming that we're not like Europe. We don't persecute people on the basis of religion. That was a lie that they tried to put forward to establish moral authority with other Europeans. Oh, religion being the principal means by which certain groups of white people differentiated themselves from other groups of white people, which is what they usually mainly meant. All that stuff that was going on in the 90s in the former Yugoslavia, that was actually ethnic warfare claiming to be about religion. Same thing goes in Ireland. That was ethnic warfare claiming to be about religion. But the lie the U.S. put forward is that it is uniquely suited and uniquely just for the United States to say what should be, because the United States has the moral authority to do so, because the United States is a place where democratic norms are respected and people's rights are respected and such. Except dealing with black people puts the lie to all that. But the world would overlook it as long as black people could be ignored. When black people start causing a ruckus, then all of a sudden, well, these niggers sure are getting a little rowdy, then that's a situation that they can't control. But they've been telling that lie about how the United States is uniquely suited to lecture the rest of the world about morality. Abraham Lincoln, the United States is the world's last best hope. For what? I don't know. Woodrow Wilson, we must make the world safe for democracy. Meanwhile, black folks are being lynched from every tree that they can find. You haven't even made the U.S. safe for democracy. Though, of course, what goes unsaid is democracy. They're talking about white folks. They ain't talking about black people. Democracy, freedom, laws, the human rights. They weren't talking about black people. But that's and you can guess with all these other politicians from Roosevelt to Kennedy to Nixon to Reagan to Clinton to Obama, just rinsing and repeating the exact same lie that the United States has some sort of unique moral authority to tell the rest of the world how it should be. And they'll wash your face with World War II, never mind the fact that Henry Ford was supplying all sorts of machinery to the Nazis and wouldn't give anything to the U.S. The U.S. was as complicit in the Third Reich as the Germans. But there was also another myth. This myth of the United States is on a mission to redeem the world. The United States is on a mission to uplift and otherwise raise up the rest of the world. We're going to make the rest of the world better because the United States is perfect itself. The United States has a unique moral authority that the rest of the world simply doesn't have. And because of the United States' superior morality, the U.S. is in a position to uplift the world, and the world should listen. Well, what goes unsaid is there was another myth that the white media and white politicians and certain white liberals have decided that they would saddle onto black people. And that was the myth of the former slaves have a superior morality of a sort. And because of that, well, black people are also on their own messianic mission, and that is to redeem these white supremacists. Oh, black people are going to redeem all of these anti-black racists. That's going to be the mission of the former slaves. The former slaves see themselves as being on a mission just like Massa. Massa's out here calling himself redeeming, dominating the world. And the former slaves are trying to redeem, win the favor of Massa. Because when he says redeem, Massa ain't talking about uplifting people or making them better. His idea of redemption is now you do what I say. You obey me. That's how you redeem yourself. Do what I say. Black folks, on the other hand, our idea of redemption is massa gonna hug us and say, why, I just love you niggers. See, that's the difference between those who have power and those who do not. But now you got the former slaves. Some of us have been talking some sense into the people. And it's a matter of, no, you can go tell massa he can keep his hugs. I don't need no hug. Wouldn't want one from him anyway. This is about power. This is about my power. Been stolen, and now I'm here to take it. Well, we need to have a committee. No, you can have a committee. I'm taking my power. Well, when it comes to these statues, we need to have a committee and a vote. And next time that the legislature's in session, well, while you guys are in session, you can go ahead and have arguments about the statues I just tore down. And you see what happened. All of a sudden, the composition of the legislature to change, or the composition of the city council or the county commission to change. Oh, look at how the changes have taken place, and you didn't need a single election to get it done. That's what Dr. Claude Anderson was telling you about. Politicians react to the circumstances underneath them, and when they see that the people are on a warpath, the politicians are like, oh, we better start making some changes, because we don't want them deciding to take their anger out on us next. That's what happens when you stop asking for permission and you start taking what is yours, starting with your power. So let's put aside all these myths, like the myth of the happy, obedient Negro. That needs to be put into the ash heap of history right alongside the virtuous white supremacist. So it's not just those Confederate monuments that are getting torn down. The national myths are also beginning to be torn down as well. And it's way past due, but I suppose it's a hell of a lot better late than never.